Found out my name wasn't even mentioned in my parents' will, everything went to my brother. So I quietly stopped paying their utilities and weekly grocery runs. A few weeks later, Dad texted, "The power just got shut off." No hello, no explanation. I just replied, "Not my house." My name's Daniel, I'm 34, and I've always been what you'd call the quiet kid in the family. I wasn't rebellious or flashy like my brother Jason, and I didn't go out of my way to prove anything to anyone. I just worked hard, kept my head down, and tried to be there when people needed me, especially my parents. Growing up, Jason and I were close in age, only 2 years apart, but you'd never know it by how differently we were treated. He was the golden boy, the charming one with a flashy smile who could do no wrong. Even when he was clearly messing up, he wrecked Dad's car at 19, boys will be boys, flunked out of college, he just needs time to find his passion. Meanwhile, I got a part-time job at 16 to help pay for my textbooks and was told I needed to show more initiative, but I didn't dwell on it. Not then. I figured if I just kept showing up, being reliable, helping out, I'd earn my place. After college I landed a decent job in tech, nothing wild but stable. I wasn't raking in millions, but I could afford to live alone and even help my parents now and then. And by now and then I mean every month for years. I paid for their internet, their utilities, helped fix the roof once, and every Sunday without fail I'd swing by with groceries. It wasn't even something they asked for anymore, it just became expected. A few bags of food, some essentials, and I'd help with small stuff around the house. Meanwhile Jason, he breezes in once every few months with some dramatic story about his latest startup idea or girlfriend, gets mom and dad all excited and disappears again when things got too real. I didn't complain, not out loud, but it wore on me. The little digs, the passive comments, well Jason's always had that spark you know, or not everyone's meant to be flashy. Some people are just more supportive types. I took it in stride. I told myself they were from a different generation, that they didn't mean anything by it, that maybe, just maybe, they'd realize everything I'd done for them one day. Then came the moment that broke something in me. It was a Saturday afternoon in April when mom casually dropped it into conversation over tea, no fanfare, no setup, just a soft almost cheerful "Oh, we finally finalized our will last week, isn't that a relief?" I blinked. "Oh, that's good, glad you're getting all that sorted." She nodded, stirring her tea slowly like she was trying to remember if she added sugar. "Yes, we left everything to Jason, of course. Makes the most sense. He's the oldest and he's got plans, you know, real ambitions." I didn't even know what to say at first. I laughed. Not because it was funny but because I was sure I'd misheard. "Wait, everything is in the house. The car, the savings." She nodded again, this time without even glancing at me. It's just simpler that way. You're doing fine on your own. You don't really need anything from us." That word need, it hit me harder than I expected. Like the past 15 years of unpaid bills and grocery bags and roof repairs meant nothing because I wasn't the one with a sob story or a spotlight. I'd never asked them for a thing. I thought that meant they respected me. Turns out it just made me invisible. I didn't get angry, not right away. I went home, sat in my apartment, stared at the ceiling for a while. My fridge still had leftovers from their Sunday grocery run. The internet I paid for had just gone up $5 a month and I hadn't even blinked. I thought about every little thing I'd done. Every time I prioritized their comfort over mine. Then I opened my bank app and started making changes. First went the autopay for their utilities, then the grocery budget. I deleted the recurring reminder I had set, Sunday parents' groceries. I didn't announce anything. I didn't say a word. I just stopped. 3 weeks went by. I half expected a call, but nothing. Not until a Wednesday evening around 7:42 p.m. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. No greeting, no how are you, just power just got shut off, you forget to pay. I stared at the screen. It took me a second to realize he genuinely thought I had forgotten. Like the utilities weren't even their responsibility anymore. I typed then deleted then typed again. I kept it short, 5 words, "Not my house, good luck." That was the moment I realized how deep their entitlement really ran. They didn't just take me for granted, they built an entire system around it. A system where Jason was the visionary and I was the support staff, where my contributions didn't warrant recognition because they were never really mine to give. They were expected like breathing. The silence after that text was interesting. No follow-up, no apology, not even a passive-aggressive thumbs up, just silence, until the groceries ran out. The next Sunday I went for a walk. The sun was out, birds chirping. It felt strange not to be hauling paper bags into their kitchen, but peaceful, freeing. I ended up at a little cafe on the corner, ordered myself a proper breakfast for once, eggs, toast, and orange juice that wasn't on sale. Halfway through my meal, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Mom Grocery Day, she wrote. Just those 2 words, not a question, not a reminder, more like a prompt, as if I'd just forgotten my place. I didn't reply, I let it sit. The next day she called, I didn't answer. 2 days later she texted again. "I know you're busy but we're running low on everything, can you swing by again?" Nothing. That Friday Jason finally called me, and that's where things started to take a turn I didn't expect. He didn't yell or blame me, no, he tried something worse, being reasonable. "Look man," he said, his voice smooth like always, "I know Mom and Dad can be a lot but they're getting older, they need help, you've always been good at that." I leaned against the kitchen counter staring out my window. "They left everything to you, Jason. Everything. So why aren't you stepping up?" There was a pause on the other end, like he hadn't thought I'd say that out loud. "It's not about the will," he said finally, "it's about doing the right thing." I nearly laughed. "Funny, that's exactly what I've been doing for the past decade." He sighed. "Don't make this about money." "I'm not," I said. And I meant it, I'm making it about respect, and for once in my life I'm respecting myself. That was the last time we spoke for now, but that wasn't the end of it because a few days later I got a knock at my door and when I opened it what I saw made my stomach twist. Not out of guilt but a kind of disbelief that still hadn't worn off. Standing there disheveled holding a bag of melting groceries was my father. He looked older than I remembered, not in a dramatic time has passed sort of way but in that subtle uncomfortable sense that life had started wearing him down and he didn't know how to handle it. His posture wasn't as stiff as usual and he didn't bark my name like he sometimes did, he just stood there holding that plastic grocery bag like it was proof he still had some kind of dignity left. "Hey," he said, "just that." I didn't say anything. I held the door open but I didn't move out of the way. He sighed, shifting the bag in his hands. "Didn't know what kind of milk you drink? Got whole? That's still okay?" It hit me then, he thought this was some kind of peace offering, that a bag of groceries could balance out years of neglect or at least buy him back the unpaid labor I'd stopped giving. I didn't move. "You want to come in?" I asked flatly, not out of warmth but because I wanted to see where this was going. He nodded, stepped inside awkwardly like it wasn't the same apartment he used to just stroll into whenever he felt like it. He placed the bag on the kitchen counter and stood there, hands in his pockets, pretending to admire the place even though he'd seen it dozens of times before. "It's nice," he said, "clean." I stared at him. "Why are you here, Dad?" He looked at me like I just asked something impossibly complicated. "Your mother's. Well, she's not happy about the will thing. She didn't think it would upset you so much." I raised my eyebrows. "She didn't think disinheriting me would upset me?" He rubbed his jaw, looked away. "It wasn't personal? Then who was it about?" I asked, because if it was about fairness or effort or who actually shows up, don't tell me you thought Jason deserved everything more than I did. Silence. I let it sit. He sighed again, heavier this time. "We figured he'd need it more. You've always been solid, responsible, you make do." Jason's still finding his footing. I wanted to scream that word again, need, like I was a backup generator that didn't need maintenance because I never failed, because I functioned. "That's the problem," I said quietly. "You confuse reliability with not needing, love with not needing respect." He looked down. "We didn't mean for it to come off that way." I leaned against the wall, arms folded. "That's the thing, Dad. It didn't come off that way. It is that way. You wrote it down, signed it, had it notarized." He glanced at the bag on the counter. "The power's back but barely. We had to move some stuff around." I nodded. "Good. That's what adults do." He blinked at me. "So that's it? You're just done?" That was the moment right there where the full weight of it hit him, that I wasn't bluffing, that the years of me being the fallback, the quiet helper, the dutiful son who never asked for anything, that version of me didn't live here anymore. I didn't answer. I just walked over to the bag he brought, took out the milk and slid it into my fridge without a word. The silence in the room thickened. He looked around like he didn't know where to go from here. "We didn't expect this," he admitted, voice low. "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "You expected me to keep doing everything for you, for free, forever, because you thought I'd be too afraid to stop, that I'd be too loyal, too grateful, too passive." He didn't deny it. Then I saw it, just for a second, the flicker of something in his face that wasn't shame or guilt. It was fear, not because I was angry, but because he realized I had something he didn't. Boundaries. The doorbell rang. He looked startled and I frowned, brushing past him to answer it. Standing there was Jason, hair perfectly styled, sunglasses on his head, sleeves rolled up like he was coming from some lunch meeting with an investor he hadn't actually booked. "Hey," he said, flashing that easy smile. "Dad said you were being stubborn." My jaw clenched. "You're kidding." He held up his hands. "Look, I get it, you're mad, rightfully, but this isn't how family solves things." "Family," I said, crossing my arms. "Funny, I didn't realize I counted as family." Jason stepped inside without being invited. As always, he gave the place a quick glance and dropped onto my couch like he owned the place. "Come on, man, it's just paperwork. The will can be changed. What matters is that we move forward." I shut the door behind me, slower than I needed to. "Move forward," I repeated, "after years of me doing everything while you played business dress up and called it ambition?" Jason laughed too loud. "You always take things so personally." Dad hovered behind me, arms crossed. "Can't we all just sit down and talk about this like adults?" That's when something in me clicked, something cold, calm, and final. "I am an adult," I said. "That's the difference. I've been one for a long time. I just stopped letting you treat me like a child." Jason leaned forward, tone shifting slightly. "So what now? You cut us off? Is that really the kind of person you want to be?" I walked over, opened the fridge and pulled out the milk they brought. "You want to know what kind of person I am?" I asked, placing the milk back down and looking them both in the eye. "The kind of person who knows his worth, who spent years being treated like an afterthought, and who finally realized that just because someone shares your last name doesn't mean they deserve your loyalty." Jason looked like he was going to argue but I cut him off. "You came here today thinking I'd cave. You thought a bag of groceries and a smile could erase everything. But you're too late." Dad took a step forward. "So that's it?" I nodded once. "That's it." And then I did something they never expected. I opened the door, not because I was kicking them out in some grand theatrical way, but because they no longer belonged here, not in my space, not in my life. Jason stood up slowly. "You'll regret this." "No," I said. "You will." Dad gave me one last look, like he wanted to say something but he didn't. He just walked out after Jason, the door closing quietly behind them. And for the first time in my adult life the silence that followed didn't feel like punishment, it felt like peace. The days after that confrontation were eerily calm. You'd think cutting off both your parents and your brother in one afternoon would bring some dramatic fallout. Maybe neighbors whispering, relatives calling, some kind of backlash, but there was none of that, just silence. And for a while I almost convinced myself maybe they'd actually gotten the message. Maybe it sunk in. Maybe they were sitting around the cold dark house they forgot how to manage without me, realizing what they'd done. But of course that would have been too easy. It started subtly. A couple of my mutual family contacts, old aunts and uncles I barely spoke to, started liking Jason's vague dramatic posts on Facebook. Things like some people would rather burn bridges than be there when it really matters and when you're always the one helping you forget who really needs you the most. Real cryptic guilt-trippy nonsense that only made sense if you already had the whole story backward. Then came the messages. My cousin Anna messaged me one evening out of nowhere. "Hey, just heard there's some tension with the fam. Everything okay?" I kept it short, just needed space. She sent back a thumbs up followed by "Hope it works out. I know your parents love you." That was the part that stung more than it should have. They love you, maybe, but love without respect isn't love that matters. Not when it comes with conditions and blind favoritism. By the second week I got a call from my mom. I didn't pick up, she didn't leave a voicemail, just a missed call. The next day a text, "We haven't heard from you. Hope you're not still upset." Still upset, like I had thrown a tantrum, like I was sulking, not reclaiming something that had been stripped from me little by little for over a decade. I didn't respond. Instead I poured myself into my own life. I started small, reorganizing my apartment, signing up for a cooking class I'd been too busy to attend before. I even took a weekend trip to the coast, something I hadn't done in years because I'd always budgeted my time and money around my family's needs, and I started remembering what it felt like to live for myself. But the peace didn't last, not for long. About 3 weeks after the confrontation I got a letter in the mail, not a bill, not junk, a formal envelope with my name handwritten in that neat careful script my mother always used when writing Christmas cards. Inside was a note, "No dear Daniel, no love Mom and Dad, just this, if this is how you want things to be, we understand, but don't forget family is forever and when we're gone you'll have to live with how you treated us." I read it 3 times, I almost laughed. There it was, the emotional blackmail, not an apology, not an acknowledgement, just a final attempt to shame me back into servitude, to make me feel guilty for putting myself first. And the irony, I hadn't treated them badly, I hadn't yelled, I hadn't gone on social media to expose them. I simply stopped sacrificing for people who only saw me as a backup plan. I stared at that letter for a while. I didn't throw it out. I didn't keep it either. I slid it back into the envelope, tucked it into a folder in the back of my filing cabinet labeled family, just in case I ever needed the reminder. That weekend I was at the local market when I ran into Mrs. Kaplan, an old neighbor from my childhood street. She recognized me immediately even though it had been years. "Danny," she said, her voice like sunshine, "Oh my goodness, look at you." We chatted for a few minutes, small talk, catching up, and then she asked how my parents were. I hesitated. "They're figuring things out," I said carefully. She gave me a strange look. "You know I bumped into your mom last week. She told me you were going through something, that you've been distant lately." I just told her. "Well, he's always been the one keeping everything together. Give the boy a break." I smiled at that. Mrs. Kaplan had always seen more than she let on. But what she said next caught me off guard. She also mentioned something about selling the house. Said Jason was going to handle everything. My heart slowed. Selling the house. Mrs. Kaplan nodded, said they couldn't keep up with the bills, that Jason had a real estate contact. She seemed nervous. I stood there for a moment processing it. My parents' house wasn't just property. It was history, memories, roots, and now Jason, who hadn't paid a single cent toward it, was suddenly in charge of selling it. I thanked her, made polite goodbyes, and walked home faster than I meant to. Once I got inside I sat down and started digging. Public real estate records, property listings, anything that might confirm what I just heard. And there it was, listed just 2 days ago. A modest 3-bedroom home on Hawthorne Lane with a caption that read "Charming family home with potential, sold as is, contact Jason M." For details, I stared at it. So that was their plan. When I stopped being useful they didn't downsize or figure out how to budget. They just handed everything over to Jason again. The same Jason who'd mismanaged every business venture he'd ever started. The same Jason who called me stubborn and ungrateful for finally setting boundaries. And now he was selling the house I helped maintain for over a decade. The final cherry on top, the photos. There were fresh renovations in the kitchen, new backsplash, repainted cabinets, which meant they had the money, at least enough to make the house look good for buyers. They just didn't want to use it on bills or groceries. Not when they still assumed I'd keep doing it. But now they burned that bridge, and they were about to learn something they should have realized a long time ago. Jason might have been the face they showed the world, the spark, the visionary, the favorite, but I was the one who knew where everything really stood, the one who paid attention, who kept records, who knew the legal loopholes they blindly walked into while assuming I'd never push back, and I wasn't going to let him sell that house without a fight, especially not when they'd written me out of their will. That was the moment I opened my own filing cabinet, pulled out a folder marked maintenance receipts and started planning. I spent the next 48 hours combing through every folder, document, and email I had, not out of pettiness, though sure, that helped fuel the engine, but out of something colder and more precise, clarity. I had years' worth of bank statements, contractor receipts, utility payments, grocery logs, and even the agreement I'd signed when I lent my parents $10,000 to fix their roof. At the time it was casual, just something to have on paper because you never know, and we laughed about it over dinner, but now that paper was gold. Most people don't think about what it means to be the one keeping everything together until the day you stop. They don't realize just how many strings you hold until you let go and everything falls apart. Jason hadn't counted on that. Neither had my parents. I emailed a real estate attorney the next morning, laid out the situation plainly. My parents were attempting to sell their house, a house I'd financially supported and maintained for over a decade. After completely cutting me out of their will, I made it clear I wasn't trying to claim ownership, but I was challenging the nature of the agreement because my financial involvement wasn't some goodwill gesture. It was systematic, recurring, expected. In short, if they wanted to treat me like a silent investor, then they were about to learn what happens when your investor speaks up. The lawyer responded within hours. I had a case, not to own the house, but to legally dispute the proceeds of the sale under the basis of equitable interest, especially with the documentation I had, proof of financial contributions, utility payments, maintenance coverage, and the $10,000 loan for the roof. I can file a notice of interest to halt the sale temporarily, he said. It won't stop it forever, but it'll force the parties to respond legally, and that means leverage. I nodded, letting the word settle. Leverage. By the end of the week the notice was filed and less than 48 hours later my phone rang. It was Jason. You filed a what? He snapped. No greeting, no pretense, a notice of interest, I said calmly. It's a formal alert that I have a financial stake in the property. You've got to be kidding me. I'm not, he laughed bitterly. You think just because you bought a few bags of groceries, 15 years, I cut in, I covered 15 years of utilities, food, maintenance, and emergencies while you were off pretending to start a tech company in Miami. He went quiet. I didn't do this to take the house, I added. I did it to make a point, and to make sure you can't quietly cash out the family home after erasing me from every plan, decision, and dollar. This is petty, he muttered. No, Jason, petty would have been burning down the garage and leaving you the ashes. This is me finally holding you and them accountable. He didn't say goodbye. He hung up. The next message came from my mother. I don't know what you're doing, Daniel. This isn't you. Funny how people say that when they're suddenly inconvenienced. Like my entire identity was supposed to be defined by how much I tolerated. But that was the beauty of it. This was me. For the first time in years, I was acting like someone who mattered, who deserved better, who stopped accepting crumbs just to keep the peace. And then after almost a month of silence they asked to meet. Not Jason, my parents. They didn't call or send another guilt-ridden letter. They showed up on my doorstep, just like before, except this time they weren't holding groceries, they weren't smiling, and they definitely weren't smug. I opened the door slowly. My father looked like he hadn't slept well. My mother's eyes were puffy. They stood there like kids waiting outside a principal's office, unsure if they were about to be forgiven or expelled. We need to talk, my dad said. I didn't invite them in. I stepped outside, shut the door behind me and leaned against the railing. I want to start, my mom said quietly, her voice shaking. I messed up. You've been nothing but good to us, Daniel, for years, and we just assumed you'd always be there, because I always was, I said. She nodded. That's the thing. You were so reliable that we stopped noticing. I watched her watch my dad watching her, and the will. I asked. Dad stepped in then. We didn't do it to punish you. We just figured Jason needed more help. You figured wrong, he sighed. We see that now. I let the silence stretch between us. I didn't want more apologies. I wanted change. We'll update the will, Mom said. Split things fairly. You'll be included. I raised an eyebrow. 50-50? She hesitated. Well, we were thinking more like 50-50, I repeated, or the legal notice stands and I make sure any buyer sees the full breakdown of my financial involvement. Every dollar. My dad swallowed hard. 50-50. I nodded once, and Jason's out of the deal. He doesn't sell the house. He doesn't profit unless I approve the terms. They looked at each other. I could see it. Pride still clinging to the surface. But beneath it, fear, regret, and something closer to respect than I'd ever seen from either of them. My mother looked back at me and said the three words I thought I'd never hear. You're right, Daniel. And just like that the tide turned. They updated the will. I had the documents reviewed and notarized by a separate lawyer. The house sale was paused indefinitely until I decided how to move forward. Jason tried to protest, tried to guilt trip our parents into backing him again. But this time they didn't flinch, because when you've lost your most dependable person once, you learn not to risk losing him again. And me? I didn't do it for revenge, not really. I did it because somewhere along the way I stopped being a person in their eyes. I became a resource, a walking credit card with a quiet voice and a reliable Sunday routine, but not anymore. Now I'm living in that peace I built myself. I still take walks on Sundays, but I don't spend them in someone else's kitchen. I cook for me, I invest in me, I buy milk for my fridge, not to keep someone else's lights on.